At first glance, the face is familiar, the piercing blue eyes, the square jaw, the smile that once graced the covers of magazines and lit up movie screens around the world. He was the face of rebellion, of grit, of cinematic bravery. But now, at 70, that same face carries the weight of decades. There are lines where laughter once lived, a heaviness behind the eyes, not simply age, but a lifetime of battle. This isn't just the story of a Hollywood actor, it's the story of a man who took the word icon and wore it like armor until the armor cracked. Mel Gibson was never ordinary, not in his roles, not in the choices he made, and certainly not in the wars he fought, both on screen and in his soul. The world remembers William Wallace, drenched in mud and blood in Braveheart, screaming freedom from a place that seemed bigger than words. They remember Martin Riggs from Lethal Weapon, the wild cop with eyes filled with grief and chaos. But few truly know the man beneath those characters. The boy who came from nothing, the man who built an empire, and the father, lover, brother, and fallen icon, whose tragedies were never just headlines. They were cries behind closed doors. Born in New York in a family that could barely afford heat in the dead of winter, Mel was the sixth of 11 children in a house where everything was shared: food, clothes, even space to breathe. Poverty didn't harden him at first. It quieted him. He was shy, sensitive, a boy surrounded by noise who learned early that silence could be survival, but silence also births hunger, not just for food, but for something greater, a way out, a way up, a reason to believe that life could be more than just getting by. At 12, everything changed. His family packed what little they had and moved to Australia. The reasons were complicated, part economic, part spiritual, part escape, but for Mel it was more displacement than salvation. In a new country with a strange accent and strangers in the schoolyard, he became a target, mocked, pushed, humiliated, day after day, until one day he fought back, with fists first, then with something sharper, determination. That's when the anger began to take root, slow at first, but deep, the anger of being unseen, of being an outsider, of feeling not enough. And then from the quiet came a spark. His sister, seeing in him a glimmer no one else had noticed, applied to drama school on his behalf. She paid the fee, gave him the first small chance. He had nothing to lose. He went bruised from yet another street fight. The school didn't see the bruises. They saw something else: rawness, depth, potential. And suddenly, Mel Gibson, the anonymous factory worker, was Mel Gibson, the actor. Not by luck, but by fire. What followed were the roles that turned him from unknown to unforgettable. Mad Max wasn't a performance, it was a warning, a signal of a star coming in too hot to contain. Then came Gallipoli, the year of living dangerously, each film peeling back a layer of a man who understood pain deeper than dialogue. By the time Lethal Weapon exploded onto screens, Gibson wasn't just acting the part of a man on the edge, he was living it. Haunted, explosive, magnetic. People couldn't stop watching, not because he was polished, but because he was real. But real comes with risk. Fame seduced him in the same way. Shadows did. There were whispers on set. Long nights that bled into longer regrets. Drink became his escape, just as it had when he was barely a teenager, running from bullies. Only now the stakes were higher. He wasn't just another kid with a bottle. He was Mel Gibson, and the world was watching. Still, in the chaos, there was brilliance. He didn't just stay in front of the camera, he stepped behind it. Braveheart was a masterpiece, not because it was perfect, but because it was pure. Gibson bled for that film, bled into it. He didn't direct it, he lived it. Freeze frame it now, at the end when Wallace is dying, and look into his eyes, you'll see something haunting, not a performance, but a confession. And in that moment he was more than a movie star. He was a man standing in the mud, daring the world to forget where he came from. It wasn't just fame that began to weigh on Mel Gibson, it was the deep invisible wounds behind it. The cameras captured the smiles, the interviews, the billion-dollar box office hits, but what they didn't capture were the nights spent pacing in empty hotel rooms, the hangovers that felt like punishment, the slow fracture of a man who had spent too long pretending the performance was over when the cameras stopped rolling. In 1995, Braveheart won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Director and Best Picture, a feat that would define most careers. For Mel, it was both a peak and a pivot. He stood on that Oscar stage, not as an actor, but as a creator. Yet behind the applause was a man exhausted, not from the film, from the fight. The fight to be enough. The fight to silence the ghosts whispering in his ear, "You're nothing without this. You're only worth what the crowd gives you." The years that followed were a paradox. Success came stronger than ever. A-list roles, paychecks that turned him into one of the wealthiest faces in Hollywood, and a global fan base that clung to every frame. He bought mansions, land, even an island. To the world, Mel Gibson had it all. But the cracks were growing, silently, behind the glass walls of perfection. And no one, not fans, not insiders, was ready when those cracks shattered. The storm began to form publicly in 2006. Mel was arrested for driving under the influence. That night wasn't just a personal low, it became a global event. His comments, slurred and angry, spiraled into controversy, and in a single moment, he went from Hollywood hero to pariah. A man who had once directed armies on screen now stood against a firing squad of headlines, cancellations and closed doors. Hollywood didn't just turn its back, it sealed the gates. Films in development vanished. Collaborators walked away, and Mel, for perhaps the first time in a long time, was left in the silence he knew all too well, the same silence that used to fill his childhood room at night, only now heavier, wrapped in shame. But perhaps the most painful part of that fall wasn't the loss of reputation, it was the loss of home. For 26 years, he'd been married to Robin Moore. Their union had defied Hollywood norms, 7 children, a stable life built distant from the flashbulbs. She had been his peace amidst the madness, his rock in a sea of chaos. But chaos doesn't stay outside forever. The old demons, drink, rage, recklessness, slipped into the walls of that home, and in 2011, the thing he valued most slipped away. The divorce was the most expensive in Hollywood history, costing nearly $400 million, but the real cost couldn't be written on a legal document. It was coming home to a quiet house, seeing one less place set at the table, not hearing the laughter down hallways that once overflowed with family. Money could rebuild buildings, but not memories, not trust, not love. And yet amidst the ruin, there was still flicker. In 2004, just before his downfall, Mel created a film no studio wanted, no executive believed in, The Passion of the Christ. He funded it himself. Nearly $30 million of his own money. And against all odds, it shook the world. Critics were divided. Some called it brutal. Others labeled it genius. But one thing was undeniable. Audiences came in waves. The film made over $600 million globally. Gibson had built something sacred, something raw, something unfiltered. It was the most spiritual thing he'd ever created, and perhaps also the most personal. Because Mel Gibson, more than most, understood pain. He understood betrayal. And he understood the idea that sometimes salvation must be bought through suffering. But after the arrest, after the tapes were leaked, after the world turned its back, the man who had once held Hollywood in his hands was suddenly untouchable. Studios wouldn't return his calls. Former friends avoided his name. And Gibson, known for grand speeches and bold roles, went silent. He didn't give interviews. He didn't beg for PR campaigns to fix his image. He vanished. And for nearly a decade, he stayed in that exile, alone with his failures, forced to face himself without costume or script. Most men don't come back from that. Most sink into bitterness. Some never speak again. But Mel Gibson isn't most men. He entered recovery quietly. No cameras, no confessions on talk shows. He showed up, day after day, in rooms where fame meant nothing, and truth was currency. He admitted what many wouldn't. That alcohol wasn't just a bad night, it was a shadow he had carried since adolescence. That rage wasn't rebellion, it was a scar he hadn't healed. That survival wasn't about avoiding pain, it was about walking through it. Each morning became a choice. And it's easy to forget now, but that battle was harder than any role he ever played. To stay sober, to stay afloat, To stay silent, when the world doubted he even deserved a second chance. And what came next? It wasn't a comeback, it was a resurrection. In 2016, Gibson returned to the director's chair, not with spectacle, not with a studio-demanded blockbuster, but with a film about a man who saved lives without ever picking up a weapon. Hacksaw Ridge was Mel's way of showing the world what he had learned in exile, that conviction doesn't need noise, that real courage can be quiet, that belief, when stripped of ego, anger and addiction, can still change the world. The production was brutal, long days, tight budgets, blood and mud and fire, both on screen and in the soul of its director. But for the first time in a long time, Gibson wasn't chasing redemption, he was creating from it. The result: 6 Academy Award nominations, 2 wins, a standing ovation from the very industry that had once cast him into oblivion. It wasn't just a film, it was proof that even the fallen can rise, that art, when fused with humility, can heal not just a career, but a legacy. But success doesn't erase scars. Just months later, tragedy struck again. His Malibu home, a sanctuary by the sea, filled with decades of memories, was devoured by wildfire. Everything gone: photos, heirlooms, keepsakes, charred remains where once stood laughter and life. He said later, in an interview barely a few seconds long, "The pain isn't the house, it's the memories you can't rebuild." He wasn't angry, just quiet, tired. A man who had walked through fire, again, and yet life offered him an unexpected gift. Her name was Rosalind Ross, a screenwriter, 35 years younger than Gibson, who entered his life not in the chaos of red carpets, but in the quiet aftermath. At first, doubters called it a midlife illusion, a scandal waiting to happen. But years have passed now, and Rosalind still stands beside him, with patience he never earned, and grace he probably needed more than he realized. In 2017, they welcomed a son, Lars. For a man who'd built an empire, won Oscars, and been to the very peak of cinema, nothing brought him more peace than holding a baby again. Not because he hadn't done it before, he had 9 children total, but because this time was different. This time it wasn't about proving he could be a father, it was about becoming one all over again. Gibson once said, "You never stop being a dad, even when you fail, especially when you fail." Those words weren't for the public, they were for him, an older man now, weathered, softer, a face not just aged by time, but by regret, by reflection, and by the long road it takes to become human again, not just a hero on screen. And as Lars grew, something shifted in Mel. The fire inside didn't vanish, it shifted form. It wasn't rage anymore, it was resilience. At 65, he started cutting weight, nearly 30 pounds, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. His back, forever shaped by a spine defect he kept hidden from the world, had begun to rebel. Years of stunts, of armor, of slamming into cars, and crashing through film sets, it had left him almost broken, but he fought back, through pain, through age, through everything that told him to sit down, and still, he stood. Not as William Wallace, not as Martin Riggs, not even as the director of billion-dollar legacies, as Mel, just Mel, a man who had burned, crumbled, healed, and risen. At 70, his movements are more careful now, his gaze more measured. The energy that once erupted in fistfights and chaotic interviews has settled into something quieter, something reflective. There's pain in his walk, not metaphorical, but physical. Years of stunts, long hours in armor, camera-ready workouts, and unspoken spinal pain have taken their toll. It wasn't until 2025 that the public learned the full truth. Gibson was born with a crooked spine, a malformed structure that made every role, every sword fight, every on-screen battle 10 times harder than it looked. And still, he never complained. While others demanded safer stages or body doubles, Gibson drove himself through the fire because to him, pain was part of the art. But it didn't come without cost. Today, his back aches through quiet mornings, his gait stiffens by night, and though he smiles, nods and greets fans when he appears, the truth is written clearly in the joints. The man we cheered for so long runs no more. He walks, and even that is a victory. He gave his body to cinema, and now cinema has given him nothing in return but memory, and wealth, of course. There's that. Mel Gibson's net worth now sits at nearly $500 million. From poverty's floor to financial Olympus, He built an empire, Malibu Mansions, a sprawling ranch in Texas, a near-mythical 5,000-acre private island in Fiji, Mago Island, untouched, pristine, protected. It's ironic in a way. The most turbulent man of his generation owns one of the quietest places on earth, but the money was never just indulgence. Behind the luxury and the headlines were donations few ever bothered to mention. He gave tens of millions, quietly, to children's hospitals, schools, recovery programs, indigenous communities, environmental sustainability efforts, and historical preservation projects. There were no press releases, no photo ops, no gold plaques, just someone who had taken from the world, trying in some small way to give back. He built a church in Agora Hills, the Holy Family Chapel, a small traditional structure with hand-carved wood and stained glass, funded entirely by Gibson, not for his legacy, not for forced penance, but because faith, despite everything, had always lived in the cracks of his life, broken, flawed, inconsistent, but still there. And when he sits in the back pew on quiet Sundays, he is not Braveheart, he is not the comeback king, he is just a man, asking for peace no Oscar can provide. But not all ghosts stay buried. Some of his children from his long marriage drift in and out of contact, still navigating the aftermath of a family once whole, then fractured. His daughter with Oksana Grigorieva, Lucia, grew up in the shadow of a custody battle that once made global headlines. The tapes, the lawsuits, the pain that spilled across tabloids. It wasn't just about a relationship gone wrong, it was about a man unraveling, and the child caught in the crossfire. And yet, Gibson continues to try. He calls, reaches out, and with Lars, his youngest, he tries differently, more present, more listening, less preaching. He speaks often now about fatherhood, not with pride, but humility. Being a dad doesn't come with credits, he once said. You have to earn it every day. That's a truth he learned the hard way. Career-wise, he's still building, slowly, not chasing roles anymore, but nurturing them. He's directing again, producing, developing The Resurrection of the Christ, a follow-up to the film that once shook the world. He's working with actors like Mark Wahlberg on Flight Risk, and yes, the long-rumored Lethal Weapon 5 still flutters in and out of development limbo. Whether it comes or not, the point isn't the screen time, it's that he's still creating, still standing with call sheets and camera crews, orchestrating meaning out of story. That, more than anything, is Gibson's mark. Not that he never fell, but that his falls became his foundation, that every hate headline, every cancellation, every broken relationship became a part of a larger picture, not of destruction but of survival. It's strange, really. The man once known for chaos is now one of the few left not pretending to be perfect. At 70, he's endured more than most, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. He's lost homes, lost family, lost public love. He's been both monster and martyr in the public eye. But what if the truth is somewhere in between? What if he's neither villain nor victim, but a man who simply refused to disappear? There's a moment, late at night, when the world forgets you exist. No cameras, no schedules, no emails, just silence. It used to terrify Mel Gibson, that silence, because for most of his life, noise was his compass. Claps, lights, chaos, set builds, dialogue rewrites. It all kept his inner stillness at bay. But now, at 70, he doesn't run from it. He listens to it. He lets it crawl in between the memories, because what remains at the end is not the applause, not the box office, not the scandals. It's what you became when no one was looking. Mel doesn't speak often these days. When he does, it's measured. Press cycles don't interest him. He's not chasing relevance or reputation repairs, fame for fame's sake. That died years ago. What he fights for now, quietly, is legacy. Not the monument kind, but the human kind. The kind you pass in moments, not in movies. He's often seen now in Texas, walking the edge of his ranch, horses in the distance, a rifle slung low for coyote patrol, not for sport, for protection. His home rests on elevated ground, where the hills roll like waves into the horizon. Wind cuts through the silence, brushing against acres of land few will ever step foot on. It's quiet here, and that quiet belongs to him. Inside,
The walls are filled with photographs, not of red carpets, but of children, some now grown, some distant, some still learning about him, even after knowing him their whole lives. But all are there, frozen in moments where his smile wasn't for the public, it was for them. Today, he says less, but perhaps he has more to say now than he ever did before. He once admitted to a friend, "I used to think survival meant staying in the game. Now I think it means knowing when to leave the room, not out of shame, but out of strength, out of having seen every side of the climb, the summit, the slip, the abyss, and the slow aching rise back up." The tragedy of Mel Gibson isn't that he failed, it's that he gave so much of himself, body, mind, soul, to an industry whose love is fickle. One scandal, one soundbite, one leak, and they cheered for his exile louder than they ever had for his art. But that's what Hollywood does. It isn't built for healing, it's built for highlight reels. And yet somehow, he healed anyway. Not completely. Scars remain. Relationships remain strained. There are places his name still stirs tension. But the measure of a man isn't in how perfectly he walks, but how often he chooses to get back up limping. Gibson at 70 isn't the firebrand of yesterday. He's quieter now, gentler, but you can still see the weight in his stare, the one that holds decades behind it. Decades of battle, of art, of mistakes, of miracles. He spends more time with Lars now, teaching, walking, watching the world through his son's innocence. And in those moments, something rare happens. Mel laughs. Not forced, not polished for a camera, but real. The laugh of a man who thought he had lost everything, only to find that what mattered most couldn't be bought or built, only earned again, slowly, tenderly. The world might not remember every headline, but it will remember the feeling he gave you the first time you saw him stand tall with his face painted blue, the heartbreak in Riggs' eyes, the reverence in the passion of the Christ, the raw humanity carved into every corner of his performances. These weren't just characters, they were torn pages of a life lived too honestly to ever be clean. If there's anything left to say about Mel Gibson at 70, it's this: greatness never promised peace, and redemption doesn't guarantee a spotlight. Sometimes, greatness whispers its final truth quietly, in fields far from flashing lights. Sometimes, the most heroic thing a man can do is simply endure, without applause. And Mel Gibson, whatever you think of him, the man has endured, through fire, through exile, through silence, and through age. He is not the same man he was at 35. He's slower now, broken in ways we'll never truly know, but also whole in a way the younger version of him never was. And that's the tragedy, and the triumph. Because in choosing to rise, one last time, Mel Gibson didn't just ask the world to forgive him. He learned how to forgive himself.